Let's start recording. All right, so for the first question, can you just give a brief introduction of who you are and your background as an artist?
Yeah, I'm Samira Abbassy. I've been making work for about 35 years, and I make drawings, paintings, and sculpture. And in this show, there's going to be paintings.
And can you also briefly kind of touch on what your educational journey has been like from Iran to the US and how that has fed into your artistic approach?
Yeah, I left Iran at the age of 2 with my parents and moved to London. And so my education was UK based for all of it. And then I came to New York in 1998 to set up the Elizabeth Foundation. So yeah, my art education was in England, and after graduating, I made a deliberate sort of attempt to research everything, more Middle Eastern and sort of. I was looking at Indian and Persian miniatures, as well as things like Qajar painting, which are 19th century court paintings from Iran. And then, a lot of my interests were in sort of medieval and sort of pre-Renaissance painting, which is what I've been looking at for a long time. Yeah.
Cool. And so the next question is, how do you challenge social norms in your art? And kind of hand in hand, what role does politics play in your art?
Politics is something that I have taken on in a specific series, the War series, which the Metropolitan Museum acquired about 5 years ago. And that was the War series. And it was based on the premise of the Shahnameh was the initial reference. And I made a multi-paneled painting about the US invasion of the Middle East, specifically around Iraq and Afghanistan. And I used media imagery to kind of convey that, but attempting to use language of the Shahnameh, which is a sort of epic poem, originally written by Ferdowsi, I think, but it's a mixture of history and mythology. And so I used media images to kind of convey this idea that our media is part mythology.
Cool. You kind of mentioned poetry, so I wanted to ask you, so the title of the exhibition is Our Tears Are Sweet, Our Laughter Venomous, which is a quote from Simin Babahani. Is the quote a sentiment that you share at all? And how does that poetry fit into the multiple roles that you're asked to take on?
Well, it seems to me like it feels like a very feminine sentiment, in that tears are acceptable, and that sort of, personal anguish and so on can be communicated, legitimately. Because I feel in my work there is autobiography, and there is sort of sentiment, and the honoring of emotion as a form of self-knowledge. So that quote sort of rings that quite clearly for me. But it's also it intimates a strength in the release of difficulty.
And let me see the other question. Are there specific mediums or concepts in your work that you're drawn to? Um, well, I guess a better way to reframe it would be, are you drawn to specific mediums or concepts and incorporate that into your work?
So what is the media and concept?
For example, so far, like in interviews, the last artist that I interviewed, she was really drawn to, I guess, like one thing that she tried to approach gender norms with was like lingerie, and kind of like challenging those stereotypes in that way. So, is there anything, I guess, like theme wise or even in the materials that you use in your art, like, is there anything you're drawn to?
Hmm. Well, the figure dominates my current work and my work for a long time, I guess. And so I use the figure as a vehicle for to portray the sort of the ineffable and the psychological and the socio-biological, psychological as a kind of an enwrapped idea of all of them appearing on the surface at once. So um, the figure is for me a vehicle for all of those attempts at drawing the human figure, and and the medium is drawing, painting, and sculpture. So I I go towards these various ways of doing it because I think that there is uh, it's sort of to stop habitual ways of doing things. I kind of want to catch myself out by attempting different materials and scales, and you know, whether it's a small or large, or whether it's in clay or in charcoal. Um, and I let the work lead me. And what that means is that, you know, a lot of the ideas come through the materials or the process. I mean, I use an overhead projector, or um, I find ways of sort of tricking myself into making new forms of the thing, whatever it might be.
Hmm. And kind of going off of that, I wanted to ask you about your pieces that are actually going to be showcased at the exhibit. So the first one, carrying herself as a corpse blue. Can you kind of speak more on that, on your process behind it, what I guess you want to express from that piece?
Yeah, that piece is has a twin. I did that painting twice, and I believe the one that's shown is the first one, and it was I try and play with ideas uh, of metaphor, of what it's like to carry oneself, and in this painting there was a separate self that's being carried, and it, it's it's an attempt at portraying what the psychological idea of um, having, you know, a human being being more than one complete thing, and that we carry aspects of ourselves. Um, and you know, the thing about language is that once it's translated into an image, it becomes this kind of surreal, clumsy thing. And but that's what I enjoy about it. It's like um, it can literally can be quite surreal, and that's the kind of thing that I play with in the painting.
Hmm. And the next one, Ghosts of Her Migration. Can you also speak on that one?
Yeah, that was actually part of a diptych, um, and you know, ideally they'd be shown together, but it was recently sold, like last year, I think. Um, but that goes for migration. It's one of my themes is this idea of having migrated and what's left behind and what we carry with us. And in that image, if I remember rightly, there are some hands coming in from outside the picture, pulling at and tweaking at parts of the hair and the head and the brain, possibly. And so it's an idea of depicting what it is to be connected to another place while being in one place, and sort of splitting ourselves in sort of time and memory. um um yeah.
Yeah, I actually really like this piece too because it looks really like multifaceted to me. Like the image is kind of moving.
Mhm.
Um, but
Yes,
it's but it's in place. Like it's really intriguing.
yeah, it's got profile as well as an implication of full face. So it's this dilemma of, my work, generally is about the human dilemma of not of being part being living in time, and the way that our mind can span time. I mean, we're here but we're not really here because we're thinking about something else, or um yeah, it's very sort of um it's deliberately asking questions about those dilemmas of how to be and the way that being feels from the inside.
Oh, that's amazing. And so the next one that I wanted to ask you about was Star-Crossed Lovers.
Mm. Yeah, that was more of an attempt at a traditional um, uh, sort of Qajar painting, because there are, in that in the book, in the catalogue of Qajar paintings I have, there are many depictions of lovers, and I I wanted to, and I've made more than one of that painting, and I wanted to have an idea of merging two figures into one and what that would be. And it's also a sense of, I mean, it's an idea about the masculine, feminine enrolled, rolled into one. Um, and it goes back to, also there's, I'm very interested in Jungian ideas about the self being made up, for example, of the masculine and feminine.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's something that is also very, well, I wouldn't say very evident, but it was something that I was also kind of curious about because it did kind of make me wonder if it had something to do with kind of like challenging any like stereotypes with gender or anything. Um, yeah, I really like that one too. So the next one would be Bound by Her Fate. Can you also speak on that piece?
Yeah, again, that was part of a diptych, and the way I make my diptychs is that they stand alone as well as together.
Mhm.
And a few years ago, I made a series of paintings and drawings about the idea of swallowing hair or being gagged by hair. And again, this is an attempt at making the psychological into a visceral, physical reality. And it came from this phrase, "I can't swallow that," is when somebody has said something that you can't really accept, and it's the idea of these unacceptable things that we come across, whether it's through other people or from ourselves. They're sort of psychological realities that are not comfortable, and ways of depicting that. So, um, and then, you know, there's also this notion that when we are made to swallow something difficult, we ingest it, absorb, and it becomes part of us. And so there's a full acceptance. Once we swallow that difficult thing, what is the word? We make it part of ourselves. And and therefore it's not as dangerous to us. And again, this goes back to a Jungian idea, which he got from alchemical ideas of the I think it's the Arboreum, the snake swallowing its own tail. And it's a conundrum of the impossible and the difficult, and also the idea of the peacock swallowing poison in order to make its tail more iridescent. So in Jungian theory, when we absorb and incorporate the difficult, we become individualized, we become whole.
And then the last one is face feeler.
Yeah, that's a new recent one that was part of a set that I was playing with. It's going along the idea that I've had in the work for, this happens all over the place, the idea of the fragmented body and whether that fragment can stand as a whole. And usually it does, especially if it's a head. So this is a formal play on what can represent the figure. We can just have, a set of arms reaching, and that in itself is a figure. So it's asking, questions about representation of the figure. And things like the sentiments that, what a hand reaching towards a face, how does that register? Is it tender? Is it difficult? Is it, so again, I let the painting lead me, and I found this kind of, it's almost like a collage as well, because it's like a drawing with oil paint, that one.
How did you come across, I guess, or how did you know that you wanted to explore like the psychology in humankind through your art? How did you happen to not stumble upon it, but just kind of find your way to doing that?
Well, it was the work that led me there and made that very clear to me. Because when I look at a painting, I'm not only looking at how it's made, but the psychological tension for me is what carries its weight. And especially when it comes to a figure, its psychological presence to me is what the painting is all about. There's also, my interest in things like pre-Renaissance paintings of, saints and, religious iconographies, is that these are, I don't see, they are religious paintings. They were made for that purpose, and, they were made for the church and so on. But for me, they're, religion is, and the spiritual aspect of things is psychological. It's about how to be in the world, and the sense of the spirit within. And if we translate that idea from medieval times about the spirit and soul, what that means these days is the psychological aspect. As we could see, psychoanalysis as the current field of exploring the mind and the spirit and the well-being of the psychological human being. And I see it as a sort of a snapshot into the psyche when I look at certain paintings. And in these early paintings, the reason I keep going back to them is that they don't deal with real space. They deal with psychological space. They deal with every time and no time. Like the icon, for example, it doesn't describe an event exactly. It's just a snapshot of being.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Cause yeah, like even in your art, like I said, to me it kind of gives off like a movement, but at the same time, like there's stillness. So it's like those snapshots that you're talking about, like they're fragments in existence that seem like, the movement of life, but it's also like capturing just the stillness of being, which is, I think I don't know, like it's kind of contradicting, but at the same time, like that's kind of how life is. I don't know. Um,
Yeah, more true to life. Hopefully, it's
yeah,
what it is to be alive.
yeah, awesome. All right, so the next question is there anything that you hope that viewers take away from your work once they experience it? Um, I guess anything specific that you would hope that they would walk away with?
Um, Hopefully, some of the things that you've said, that there's a, a mutual understanding about what it is to be, and the reason I love religious painting is there is a sense of compassion, and that by by seeing these difficult things, by experiencing difficult psychological events, and seeing a beautiful painting that depicts that, it it has a healing effect, a compassion, the compassion of the viewer and the maker. It becomes, um, you go to paintings to, in a way, to find peace, even if they depict difficult situations. There's a sense that somebody else understands,
Mhm.
uh, and there's a, yeah, it's about a mutual feeling of being understood on both ends by the viewer and the maker.
And lastly, as an Iranian woman artist working in the US, are there any additional thoughts you would like to share in reflection of this experience?
Of the experience of being an Iranian in.
Woman artists working in the US.
Yeah. No, I find that, the label is imposed on the outside. I'm a human being with my own past and my own present. I happen to be born in a country and left it at the age of 2, but yet I still am sort of representing that place. And, that continues to surprise me. But at the same time, it is the truth of, the paintings, like what I'm looking at, tends to be, I suppose, has a Middle Eastern place to it. But if I were to show my work in Iran, like, I've asked myself, would it look Iranian? Would they consider me uh, representing a kind of contemporary Iranian art that's specific to that nation, to that culture? Um, I see myself as a diaspora artist, which I think is more of a universal these days. And we all come from countries, that may have been difficult for us to exist in politically. So I see myself standing, globally in that.
That was actually one of the questions also that I know Yulia wanted me to ask was if you considered yourself a diasporic artist. And that was actually something that I was also wondering how that experience reflects in your work. Because I know you were talking about it being very psychological. So your experience of your home country and now living in another country, which would be your second home, how does that experience, I guess, feed into your expression or thought process behind like psychology and how you express that in your art?
Well, this is actually my third home, if we're talking about the word home, which is a
Mm,
complicated idea to begin with, because even the country that I was born in, I was a minority Arab.
Mm.
Uh, my people who live in the southwest were, our first language was Arabic, and we weren't Persians. We weren't speaking Farsi until, my parents would go to school and then speak it. So the idea of belonging and home, and that it has become the subject, and that has led me to the psychological state of home. And so, I mean, I'm home wherever I am. I'm now an American, and my children were born in this country. But my parents gave birth to their children in Iran and then took them somewhere else. So culturally, we didn't belong to them, and that's the state of things in the world now. I mean, each generation that's born, it doesn't matter about their place in a nation state. It's the way culture, technology, and society moves on that they find their new home there.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think I was specifically really like drawn to that question too, because that's something in my own art that I really try to explore. Like it's hard to, like you were saying, like what is home? Because my family they immigrated too from Mexico, and I wasn't born here, so to kind of like try and I guess define like the idea of home is like something really hard to do. Like it's something that I've, am still trying to figure out. And I think when I saw your art, like that was something that kind of really drew me to it because it's like I said, like fragments. It kind of reminded me of fragments that I have from
Yeah.
my idea of home, but
Mhm.
also, what I consider home, like this country, that country. So
Yeah.
um yeah, just kind of having more insight on that is, like you said, I think it helps like connect viewers to the art and stuff.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, and I think those are all the questions. I don't know if you have anything else that you wanted to share.
Um, Not really, only that I never feel that I've arrived or that I have any answers to, you know, and that I make work in order to find the answers, whatever comes up. But it's usually in fragments, and it's a constant drip drip, and everything continually changes, and that's what we're recording really, is change. And um, yeah, I mean, and I look forward to seeing the show, and kind of evaluating the work on that basis.
Do you think that you'll continue to kind of work in a way where the art drives you and not the other way around? Like, is that just how you operate as an artist?
It's a push pull. I mean, it's not like I come in here stumbling and not knowing what to do. There, I set myself up with certain tasks, but once that's set up, it's almost like setting up a trap, and then you just have to go with what happened.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
it's like some kind of freeform experiment, um, towards an end, but you can't be too attached to what end you thought it might lead you to. So that's what I mean by that. I'm led by it. I'm skilled enough to figure out, how to entrap it sometimes, but then other things happen, and I also produce accidents whereby, I want the unexpected. I want to find something. Unless I find something new in the work, there is no point in doing the new piece of work.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I hope this was as great for you as it was for me. It's been awesome getting to talk to you guys and getting to know more about your art and your creative process behind it. And I'm excited to put this together. If you have any questions, you can definitely always reach out to me. And yeah, that's it.
Okay. Well, thank you for listening, and I feel encouraged by the way that your questions are really good, and I hope I wasn't too weird and esoterical about it.
No, I think it was awesome. And like I said, I don't know, everyone has their own so far, like as artists, you guys have your own thought process behind it and what you I guess showcase through your art is so unique that like I'm excited to see the show. Um, so, all right. I hope you have a great day. And I think Yulia will be sending like a rough draft or the final version of the video to you guys just to make sure that you guys are okay with it.